The officers' lounge on the Galactic Alliance flagship Eternal Dawn buzzed with quiet celebration. 3 months had passed since the end of the brutal Vorthan War, and the mixed crew of alien species was finally allowing themselves to relax. The large viewing window showed the peaceful stars of the Kepler system, where they now patrolled in what everyone hoped would be lasting peace. Commander Daeho Kim sat at a round table in the corner, surrounded by 3 beings who had become his closest friends during the long years of fighting. His human uniform bore medals from 7 different species, each one representing acts of bravery that had saved countless lives. The other patrons in the lounge often glanced at their table with respect and admiration. Veltar raised his crystalline glass, the liquid inside glowing with a soft blue light. The Zephyrian's body was made of living crystal that caught and reflected the room's lights in beautiful patterns. His voice sounded like wind chimes when he spoke. To victory and to understanding between our peoples. Thokram clicked his mandibles in agreement. The massive Krellin stood nearly 8 feet tall, his insect-like body covered in natural armor plates. His forearms moved with surprising grace as he lifted his own drink. Indeed, we have learned much about each other in these dark times. Nixara floated beside the table, her energy form shifting between different colors as her emotions changed. The Luminar being had no solid body, existing as pure consciousness within a contained field of light. The bonds forged in battle are stronger than any treaty, she said, her voice like distant music. Daeho nodded and raised his glass, but his expression remained neutral. He had learned to be careful with his emotions around his alien friends. They often misunderstood human reactions. You know, Veltar said, settling back in his chair, I must admit that fighting alongside humans has been educational. Your species has such interesting habits. Thokram's mandibles clicked in what Daeho had learned was Krellin laughter. Remember during the Battle of Centauri Station, when that human soldier started leaking water from his eyes after his friend was injured? I thought he was malfunctioning. Crying, Daeho said quietly. It's called crying. Yes, that, Thokram continued. Such a strange response to stress. My people would simply focus on the tactical situation. But humans seem to leak these fluids and make noise when emotional. Very curious. Veltar nodded, his crystal body chiming softly, and the way humans become so attached to individual soldiers. During the siege of Europa, I watched human units refuse to advance because they wanted to recover the bodies of their fallen comrades. Logically, the mission should take priority over dead tissue. Dead tissue, Daeho repeated, his voice growing colder. Nixara's form brightened with what Daeho knew was amusement. Oh, and their need for rest periods. Every few hours, humans must become unconscious for extended periods. And they require constant intake of organic matter to function. So inefficient compared to our energy-based existence. Sleep and food, Daeho said, setting down his glass with a sharp click. Exactly, Veltar exclaimed. And don't forget their primitive communication methods. All that facial movement and body positioning. My people exchange information through direct crystal resonance. Much more efficient than human expressions, Thokram gestured with one of his forearms. The females of their species are smaller and physically weaker than the males. Yet they fight alongside them. In Krellin society, we protect our smaller members by keeping them away from danger. Humans seem to ignore basic biological protection instincts. The 3 aliens continued their discussion, treating human behavior like an interesting scientific curiosity. They spoke with the fond condescension of adults discussing the amusing antics of children. None of them noticed that Daeho had gone completely still, and their mating rituals. Nixara pulsed with bright colors. They formed these emotional bonds with single partners, often for life, so limiting compared to our species' more logical approaches to reproduction. Their violent entertainment is particularly puzzling, Veltar added. They create fictional stories about war, murder, and conflict for enjoyment. What kind of species finds violence amusing? Daeho's hand slowly clenched into fists on the table. The conversation around him continued as if he wasn't there, as if he was just another specimen to be studied and catalogued. Thokram turned to him suddenly. Daeho, you must have many amusing stories about your own species' odd behaviors. Share some with us. What human customs do you find most primitive? The table fell silent. Veltar, Thokram, and Nixara all focused their attention on their human friend, expecting him to join in their light-hearted mockery of his own people. They waited for him to laugh along with their observations. Instead, Deho slowly raised his head and looked at each of them in turn. His dark eyes had gone cold and hard. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried an edge that made the aliens shift uncomfortably. "You want to know about humans?" he asked. "You think you understand us because you fought alongside us for 3 years?" Veltar's crystal body dimmed slightly. "We simply thought it would be interesting to compare cultural observations." "Interesting," Deho repeated. He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since they'd known him, his alien friends saw something dangerous in his posture. "You want to know what's interesting about humans?" Thokram's mandibles clicked nervously. "Perhaps we should change the subject." "No," Deho said firmly. "You started this conversation. You want to discuss human behavior like we're lab animals. You want to laugh about our primitive customs and inefficient biology." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You think you know us?" Nixara's energy form flickered uncertainly. "We meant no offense, Deho. We were simply making light conversation." "Light conversation," Deho said. "About my species' fundamental nature, about the biological and cultural traits that define what we are." He leaned forward, and all 3 aliens found themselves leaning back. "You want to know about humans? Really know about us?" The atmosphere at the table had changed completely. Where moments before there had been comfortable friendship and casual banter, now there was tension thick enough to cut. Other patrons in the lounge began to notice the shift in mood at the corner table. "The truth about humans," Deho continued, "is not something you discuss over drinks. It's not a source of amusement or casual scientific curiosity." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "But since you're so interested in understanding us, let me educate you." Veltar, Thokram, and Nixara exchanged worried glances. They had never seen their human friend like this. The decorated war hero who had saved their lives countless times, who had shared meals and stories with them, who had become like family, suddenly seemed like a stranger. "I'll tell you about humans," Deho said, his eyes reflecting the starlight from the viewing window. "I'll tell you what we really are, what you've really been fighting alongside all these years, what you've really invited into your peaceful galaxy." He picked up his glass and took a slow sip, never breaking eye contact with his companions. "But I warn you," he said finally, "once you know the truth about humans, you can't unknow it. Once you understand what we are, your comfortable assumptions about us will be gone forever." The 3 aliens sat in silence, suddenly afraid to hear what their human friend was about to tell them. In the space of a few minutes, their cheerful conversation had turned into something else entirely, something that felt dangerous. "So," Deho said, setting down his glass with deliberate care, "are you sure you want to know about humans?" Deho studied the faces of his 3 companions, noting their discomfort. Good. They should be uncomfortable. They had spent the last hour treating his species like an amusing curiosity, and now it was time for them to learn the truth. "Let me start with a simple question," Deho said, his voice calm and controlled. "How many of your own species have you personally killed?" The question hit the table like a physical blow. Veltar's crystal body went completely dim for a moment. Thokram's mandibles clicked in what Deho recognized as shock. Nixara's energy form flickered between confused colors. "What kind of question is that?" Veltar asked, his voice strained. "Why would anyone kill their own kind?" "Exactly my point," Deho replied. "Veltar, in your species' entire recorded history, how many Zephyrians have died at the hands of other Zephyrians?" Veltar's crystal form rang with a confused tone. "None. Such a thing is impossible. We are logical beings. We resolve conflicts through reasoned discussion and crystal harmony. Violence against our own kind goes against our fundamental nature." Deho nodded and turned to Thokram. "And the Krellans?" Thokram shifted his massive frame uncomfortably. "We have honor duels, yes. But these are ritual combats with strict rules. No Krellan has killed another Krellan in over 1,000 years. To spill the life fluid of one's own species is the ultimate shame. It would mean exile from all Krellan society. Nixara, the energy being pulsed with nervous light. We Luminars cannot truly die as you understand it. Our consciousness can be damaged or dispersed, but we have never harmed another Luminar in such a way. It would be like cutting off part of our own collective mind." Deho leaned back in his chair. "Humans have been killing other humans for over 200,000 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Around them, the gentle hum of the ship's engines and the quiet conversations of other patrons seemed to fade away. Every single day of our existence as a species, Deho continued, we have perfected the art of ending lives. Not just any lives. The lives of beings who share our DNA, our culture, our families. We have killed our brothers, our neighbors, our own children. We have made it into an art form. Veltar's crystal body was barely glowing now. That cannot be true. No species could survive such internal violence. Oh, but we did more than survive, Deho said. We thrived. Do you know what we call it when humans fight other humans? War. We have words for 1,000 different types of killing, murder, assassination, execution, massacre, genocide. We needed that many words because we did it that often. He stood up and walked to the viewing window, looking out at the stars. His companions remained frozen in their seats, struggling to process what they were hearing. You know what's really interesting? Deho said without turning around. Each of your species evolved on worlds where cooperation was naturally selected for. Veltar, your people developed intelligence through shared crystal networks. Conflict was impossible because hurting others meant hurting yourself. Thokram's mandibles clicked weakly. Our honor codes evolved to prevent needless death. Because your species could only survive by working together, Deho finished. Nixara, your people exist as pure energy sharing a collective consciousness. You literally cannot harm each other without harming yourself. He turned back to face them. Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a death world called Earth. Do you know what persistence hunting is? None of them answered. It means we chased our prey until it died of exhaustion. We ran after animals for days, sometimes weeks, until their hearts burst from the strain. We didn't have claws or fangs or natural armor. We didn't have strength or speed. So we developed endurance and patience and the ability to never give up. Deho returned to his seat, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. But here's the thing about Earth, it wasn't just full of prey animals. It was full of predators, things that were bigger, stronger, faster and better armed than we were, things that wanted to eat us. He picked up his glass and rotated it slowly in his hands. So we became predators too. We didn't just hunt animals. We hunted each other. For territory. For mates. For resources. For pride. For revenge. Sometimes just for the fun of it. Nixara's form was now a dim, confused gray. But surely your species must have developed beyond such primitive behaviors. Deho laughed and the sound made all three aliens flinch. Primitive? You think that evolution stopped? You think we outgrew our nature? He shook his head. We took those hunting instincts and refined them. We made them more efficient, more deadly, more perfect. That crying you found so amusing? Deho continued. That's not malfunction. That's our brains processing trauma. Every human you've ever met carries the psychological weight of 100,000 years of violence. We cry because our minds are constantly dealing with the stress of being killers who choose not to kill. Veltar's crystal form was now barely visible. The attachment to fallen comrades is a survival mechanism, Deho finished. We evolved in small tribal groups where every individual was essential for survival. Humans who didn't care about their tribe members died out. Humans who would risk everything to save their people lived long enough to reproduce. That irrational attachment kept us alive when everything else on our planet was trying to eat us. He set down his glass with careful precision. And that need for sleep and food you think is so inefficient? That's because our brains are constantly running threat assessment programs. We dream about violence because violence shaped every fiber of our being. We need frequent fuel because our bodies are built for extended conflict. Thokram found his voice. But you fought alongside us. You saved our lives. You showed mercy to enemies. Because it served our interest, Deho said simply. Humans learned very early that sometimes cooperation gets better results than competition. But make no mistake, every act of mercy, every moment of kindness, every instance of self-sacrifice is a choice we make despite our nature, not because of it. He looked at each of his companions in turn. You know what the difference is between humans and your species? You do good things because that's what your evolution programmed you to do. Cooperation and peace come naturally to you. Humans do good things because we choose to fight against what our evolution programmed us to do. The table fell silent again. The three aliens sat in stunned horror as they began to understand what their human friend was telling them. Every human you fought beside, Deho said quietly, is a killer who chooses not to kill. Every moment of every day, we don't fight in spite of our nature. We fight because of it. And that's what makes us so very good at it. He leaned forward and his alien friends instinctively leaned back. Now you're beginning to understand what humans really are. Deho stood up from his chair and began to pace around the table. His movements were controlled and precise like a caged predator studying its environment. His three alien companions watched him with growing unease, beginning to notice things about their human friend that they had never seen before. The way his eyes constantly scanned the room, noting exits and potential threats. The way his hands hung loose at his sides, ready to move at a moment's notice. The way he positioned himself so that no one could approach him from behind. They had always thought these were just human quirks. Now they were starting to understand what they really meant. Veltar, Deho said, stopping directly in front of the crystalline being. Your people developed their crystal-based technology through patient geological study over millions of years. Slow, careful observation of natural processes. Very admirable. Veltar's dim form flickered nervously. We believe in understanding before acting. Humans went from discovering fire to splitting atoms in less than 10,000 years. Deho interrupted. Do you know why we advanced so quickly? Veltar shook his head, afraid to answer. Because every single technological advancement we made, we immediately asked ourselves one question. How can this kill more efficiently? Deho's voice was matter of fact, as if he was discussing the weather. Fire, we made flamethrowers. Metalworking, we made swords and spears. Gunpowder, we made cannons and bombs. Nuclear energy, we made weapons that could destroy entire cities. He moved to stand beside Thokram, who tried to shrink back in his chair despite his massive size. Your honor codes, your ritual combat, your noble warrior culture. That's what war looks like when you have the luxury of rules. Thokram's mandibles clicked weakly. Honor in battle is what separates warriors from beasts. Honor is what you can afford when you're fighting for sport, Deho said. Humans created rules of war not because we're civilized, but because we had to stop ourselves from making war so horrific that we'd make our own species extinct. He walked over to where Nixara floated, her energy form now a dull, frightened gray. The Geneva Conventions, the laws of war, rules about not targeting civilians, not using certain weapons, treating prisoners humanely. Do you know why humans needed to make these rules? Nixara's voice was barely a whisper. Why? Because without them we would have used poison gas on children. We would have tortured prisoners to death for information. We would have burned entire cities to the ground just to deny them to our enemies. Deho's voice never changed tone, remaining calm and conversational. We made rules because we knew exactly how far we were willing to go, and it terrified us. He returned to his chair but didn't sit down. Instead, he leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. You beings of pure energy think our physical forms make us weak. But you've never had to live knowing that every person around you could end your existence with their bare hands. Nixara flickered in confusion. Surely that's an exaggeration, is it? Deho asked. Veltar, how would you kill me right now with just your natural abilities? Veltar's crystal form went completely dark. I couldn't. Zephyrians are not built for violence. I have no natural weapon, Thokram. The massive Krellin warrior, for all his size and natural armor, clicked his mandibles nervously. In honorable combat with proper weapons and ceremony? No, Deho said. Right here, right now. How would you kill me? Thokram couldn't answer. Nixara? The energy being pulsed with distressed colors. I don't understand the question. I cannot harm physical beings directly. Deho straightened up. I could kill all three of you without leaving this chair. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the background noise of the lounge seemed to fade away. Veltar, Deho continued conversationally, your crystal structure is beautiful, but it's also brittle. A sharp impact at the right frequency would shatter your consciousness core. I know this because humans studied your species' physiology. We study everyone's physiology. Veltar tried to speak but could only produce a faint chiming sound. Thokram, that natural armor looks impressive, but it has gaps at the joints. Your nervous system runs close to the surface at 3 specific points. I could paralyze you in seconds and leave you to die slowly. Thokram's forearms began to shake. Nixara, your energy field is maintained by a specific harmonic frequency. The right electromagnetic pulse would disperse your consciousness permanently. The device to generate such a pulse could fit in my pocket. Nixara's form began to flicker erratically. Every human you've ever met, Deho said quietly, has this knowledge. We categorize weaknesses automatically. We assess threats constantly. We plan for violence even when we hope we'll never need to use it. It's not conscious. It's instinct. He finally sat back down and his alien companions flinched as if he had made a threatening move. That emotional crying you found so amusing? That's humans processing the psychological weight of being killers who choose not to kill. Every moment of every day we suppress instincts that tell us to eliminate potential threats. Every moment of every day we choose cooperation over competition, mercy over efficiency, friendship over survival. Veltar found his voice. But you saved our lives. You fought beside us because it served our purposes, Deho replied. Humans learned very early that sometimes cooperation gets better results than killing everything around us. But make no mistake about our motivations. He leaned forward again and all three aliens pressed back in their chairs. During the Battle of Wolf 359, when I carried Thokram to safety after he was wounded, do you think I did it out of friendship? Thokram's mandibles moved soundlessly. I did it because losing you would have weakened our unit's combat effectiveness, because your death would have demoralized the other Krellin warriors, because keeping you alive served the mission. Deho's voice was gentle, which somehow made his words more terrifying. The friendship came later. The tactical decision came first. Nixara's energy form was now barely visible. You're saying humans see everything in terms of warfare? I'm saying humans see everything in terms of survival, Deho corrected. And for us, survival has always meant being better at violence than everything else around us. We don't fight despite our friendships. We form friendships to make us better at fighting. He looked at each of them in turn. Every human strategy you praised during the war, every creative solution we provided, every moment where you thought, how did humans think of that? The answer is simple. We thought of it because we've been using those same tactics against each other for hundreds of thousands of years. The truth of what he was saying began to sink in. The brilliant military strategies that had won the war, the innovative tactics that had saved so many lives, the human ability to anticipate enemy movements and counter them perfectly. It hadn't been genius. It had been experience. Every war humans have ever fought, Deho said, has been practice for the next one. Veltar's crystal form suddenly flared with desperate light. No, he said, his voice ringing like breaking glass. You're wrong, Deho. The war was won through cooperation, through alliance between our species, through understanding and mutual respect. Thokram clicked his mandibles in rapid agreement. Yes, the victory at Corvin Prime, the liberation of the outer colonies, the final push to Vorthon space, no, these were achieved together. As equals fighting for a common cause. Nixara's energy form brightened with hope. The official records show brilliant tactical cooperation, joint strategies, combined arms operations where each species contributed their unique strengths. Deho looked at his three companions with something that might have been pity. You want to know what really happened during the siege of Corvin Prime? The aliens fell silent. Corvin Prime had been the turning point of the war, the battle that broke the Vorthon advance and began their long retreat. It was studied in military academies across the galaxy as a perfect example of multi-species cooperation. The official records, Deho said slowly, show a brilliant tactical victory achieved through innovative strategy and superior coordination. Veltar nodded eagerly. Exactly. A triumph of logic and planning over brute force. Deho's laugh was bitter and cold. The official records lie. He stood up and walked to the viewing window, looking out at the stars. When Admiral Boram Lee led the human fleet into Corvin space, we were outnumbered 3-1. The Vorthon Empire had assembled the largest battle fleet in galactic history. 1,500 ships, 900,000 soldiers. The aliens listened intently, eager to hear their human friend describe the heroic battle they had all heard so much about. The Vorthons had us surrounded, Deho continued. They had superior technology, superior numbers, superior positioning. By every logical calculation, we should have lost. But human tactics proved superior, Thokram said proudly. Your species' innovative thinking saved the day. Deho turned away from the window. 42,000 Vorthon soldiers. Veltar's crystal form chimed in confusion. What about them? That's how many died at Corvin Prime, Deho said. 42,000 Vorthon soldiers. Do you know how many prisoners we took? The table fell silent. 0. Deho said quietly. Not one prisoner. Not one survivor. Not one escape pod that made it out of the system. Nixara's energy form flickered with horror. That's impossible. The Geneva Conventions apply to humans fighting humans, Deho interrupted. The Vorthons weren't human. He returned to his seat, moving with that same predatory grace. Admiral Lee didn't defeat the Vorthon fleet. She exterminated it. Every ship destroyed. Every crew killed. Every trace of their presence in that system wiped out. Veltar's voice was barely audible, but the tactical report said what needed to be said to maintain Alliance morale, Deho replied. The truth would have horrified you, just like it's horrifying you now. Thokram's mandibles clicked desperately. Surely some Vorthons escaped. Surely there were survivors who chose to surrender. The Vorthons tried to surrender, Deho said matter-of-factly, multiple times. They broadcast surrender offers on all frequencies. They jettisoned their weapons. They powered down their shields. The alien stared at him in growing horror. Admiral Lee had studied Vorthon psychology and culture for months before the battle. She knew that Vorthons who survived defeat would regroup and attack again. Their honor codes wouldn't allow them to accept permanent defeat. So she made a tactical decision. Deho's voice remained conversational, as if he was discussing minor administrative details. She decided that the only way to ensure Vorthon forces never threatened Alliance space again was to make sure there were no Vorthon forces left. Nixara's form was now barely a whisper of light. You're describing genocide. I'm describing warfare, Deho corrected. Human warfare. When humans fight, we fight to win. Permanently. We don't leave enemies alive to threaten us later. We don't take prisoners who might escape and return with reinforcements. We don't show mercy that might be interpreted as weakness. Veltar's crystal structure was vibrating with distress. But the Vorthons weren't evil. They were just competing for resources. Like any species might do. Exactly, Deho agreed. They were just doing what any intelligent species would do when faced with resource scarcity. They expanded into territory controlled by others. They fought for what they needed to survive. He leaned forward and his alien friends pressed back instinctively. But they made one fatal mistake. They threatened human civilians. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Other patrons in the lounge began to notice the tension at their table, but none dared approach. The Vorthons attacked the human colony on New Geneva, Deho continued. They killed 300,000 people. Men, women, children, elderly. They weren't targeting military assets. They were trying to break human morale by showing that our civilians were vulnerable. His voice remained calm, but his eyes had gone completely cold. They killed our young. They killed our elderly. They killed our weak. They activated something in humans that your species have never had to develop. Thokram found his voice. What? The absolute uncompromising drive to eliminate a threat completely, Deho said. When humans decide that something needs to die, we don't stop until it's dead. We don't negotiate. We don't compromise. We don't show mercy. We exterminate the threat and everything connected to it. He stood up again, and this time all three aliens shrank back as if he had drawn a weapon. The Vorthons thought they were fighting a war. They thought they could hurt us enough to make us give up and negotiate. They didn't understand what they had really done. Deho walked around the table again, his movements controlled and deliberate. They hadn't started a war. They had marked themselves for extinction. From the moment the first human child died on New Geneva, the Vorthon Empire was doomed. Not defeated. Not conquered. Doomed. Nixara's voice was barely audible. You're saying humans plan to destroy their entire species? I'm saying humans don't make war the way you do, Deho replied. You fight until your enemies are defeated, and then you negotiate peace. Humans fight until our enemies are gone, permanently. The truth hit them like a physical blow. The war they thought they had won through cooperation and alliance had actually been a systematic extermination campaign run by their human allies. Every battle after Corvin Prime, Deho continued, was just humans working their way through the Vorthon Empire system by system, ship by ship, planet by planet. We didn't conquer their territory. We sterilized it. Veltar's crystal form was now almost completely dark. How many? How many what? How many Vorthons died? Deho considered the question. All of them. The silence that followed Deho's last words stretched on until it became unbearable. His three alien companions sat frozen in their chairs, struggling to process what they had just heard. The comfortable officers' lounge around them suddenly felt cold and hostile. Thokram finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "All of them? You killed an entire species?" "We eliminated a threat," Deho corrected, returning to his seat with that same fluid motion. "Completely and permanently. It's what humans do when we decide something needs to die." Veltar's crystal form flickered with desperate hope. But surely some survived. Somewhere in the galaxy there must be Vorthon refugees, hidden colonies. Deho shook his head. General Heejin Park was very thorough. Her intelligence teams tracked down every Vorthon outpost, every hidden base, every refugee ship. The operation took 18 months after the official end of the war. Very quiet, very efficient. No witnesses. Nixara's energy form pulsed with horrified colors. The Galactic Alliance approved of this? The Galactic Alliance was never told, Deho replied simply. You celebrated your victory and began planning for peace. Meanwhile, human ships were systematically hunting down the last remnants of the Vorthon Empire. He picked up his glass and took a slow sip, watching his companions' reactions. You want to know the most disturbing part? The Alliance didn't win the war against the Vorthons. You just pointed humanity at your enemies and let human nature do the rest. Veltar's voice was breaking like static. You're saying we're responsible for genocide. I'm saying you're responsible for unleashing predators in your peaceful galaxy, Deho answered. The Vorthons were never a threat to humanity. Earth is too far away, too well defended. They could have fought you for 1,000 years and never touched a human world. The implications began to sink in. Thokram's mandibles clicked in horror. Then why did humans join the war? Because Commander Wu Sung Choi convinced the Human Defense Council that allowing an aggressive species to conquer parts of the galaxy was bad for long-term human security, Deho explained. Better to eliminate the threat now while we had allies to provide support and cover. He set down his glass and looked at each of them in turn. Every strategy you praised us for, every innovative tactic, every moment where you thought humans were brilliant military minds, we weren't brilliant. We were experienced. Deho stood up and began pacing again, but now his movements seemed less like a caged predator and more like a professor giving a lecture. Human military doctrine is based on 10,000 years of constant warfare. We've perfected every possible way to kill, conquer, and destroy. The Vorthon War wasn't a challenge for us. It was practice, Nixara found her voice. Practice for what? For whatever comes next, Deho said simply. There's always something next. Another threat. Another competitor. Another species that thinks they can take what belongs to humans. Veltar's crystal form was vibrating with distress. But the war is over. The galaxy is at peace. Deho's laugh was soft and bitter. The war is over and now you have a new problem. You have humans in your galaxy. Permanently. And you can't put us back. He returned to the viewing window, looking out at the stars. Right now, Captain Min Ho Yoon is establishing human colonies in 12 different systems. Lieutenant So Young Nam is setting up permanent trade routes that will make human merchants essential to galactic commerce. Human families are having children on your worlds. The aliens sat in stunned silence as the full scope of what had happened began to dawn on them. We're not guests anymore, Deho continued. We're not temporary allies who will go home when the fighting is done. We're part of your galaxy now. Part of your civilization, part of your future. He turned back to face them. And you invited us in. Thokram's forearms were shaking. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to decide what kind of galaxy you want to live in, Deho replied. Because it's going to be very different from the one you had before humans arrived. Veltar's voice was barely audible. Different how? Safer, Deho said. Much safer. No species will threaten Alliance worlds now. Not after what happened to the Vorthons. The galaxy knows what humans are capable of. They know what we do to threats. He sat back down and this time his companions didn't flinch. They were too shocked to move. But also more dangerous, Deho continued. Because humans don't just eliminate external threats. We compete with each other, constantly. For resources, for territory, for dominance. It's what we do. Nixara's form flickered weakly. Are you threatening us? I'm educating you, Deho corrected. You wanted to know about humans. You wanted to understand us. This is what understanding looks like. He leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking tired. Humans will honor our agreements because it serves our interests. We'll protect Alliance worlds because we protect what's ours. We'll follow Alliance laws because cooperation gets better results than chaos. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But don't ever mistake us for the peaceful, logical beings you wish we were. Don't ever forget what we really are. And don't ever threaten what we consider ours. The table fell silent again. Around them, the normal sounds of the ship continued. Other officers laughed and talked at their tables. The viewing window showed the same peaceful stars. But everything had changed. Why are you telling us this? Veltar finally asked. Deho considered the question for a long moment. Because the war is over, and now you need to decide what to do with us. You can't uninvite us from the galaxy. You can't pretend we don't exist. You can't put us back on Earth and hope we stay there. He looked at each of his friends in turn, and you can't change what we are. Thakram's voice was hollow. What do you want from us? I want you to understand that you have a choice, Deho replied. You can work with us as equals and allies, knowing what we are and accepting it. You can try to contain us, limit our expansion, control our influence. His smile was cold and predatory. Or you can try to get rid of us. The threat was unspoken but crystal clear. The aliens understood exactly what each option would mean. The question isn't whether we'll change, Deho said, standing up from the table. Humans are what we are. We've been killers for 200,000 years. We'll be killers for 200,000 more. He looked down at his three companions one last time. They sat frozen in their chairs, finally understanding what they had invited into their peaceful galaxy. The question is whether you will. Deho walked away from the table, leaving his alien friend sitting in stunned silence. As he reached the door of the lounge, he paused and looked back. Oh, and next time you want to discuss the amusing quirks of human behavior, he said quietly, remember that every human you've ever met is a killer who chooses not to kill. Every moment of every day. The door closed behind him with a soft hiss, leaving Veltar, Thakram, and Nixara alone with the terrible knowledge of what they had learned about their human allies, and what they had learned about themselves.